on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS value picks for this week's Rocket Mortgage Classic. Going to be covering my top 6 GPP plays, priced $7,500 and below on Draftkings, and I'll be using as my quote-unquote diamonds in the rough this week that are priced a little bit lower on the board to give you some salary flexibility up top to perhaps fit in an extra stud or two into your lineups, and of course, for that much needed salary and ownership leverage. When you're going out there trying to take down these large field contests, you're going to have that guy like a Scott Piercy last week who went out there at 0.4% ownership and was nearly the nuts. Obviously, choked there towards the end, but was still in plenty of the optimal. Somebody I played last week, didn't end up giving him here on this video, but we did give Tom Hoge here this same piece of content last week. So last week, hit the near nuts with Tom Hoge, also had Scott Piercy in the player pool. So hopefully this week can build on that sort of momentum going into this event to try and give you guys those quote-unquote diamonds in the rough that I mentioned before. So a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. The first golfer I want to talk about is going to be Taylor Penderth at $7,500. He really hasn't been on the major stage of late. I mean, got an injury about 2 months ago. That was after a strong showing at the Players, and since then has played in 2 alternate field events. So we haven't really seen him on the big stage, but since then has quietly been showing that he's probably right back to the form he was before the injury. So if we take a look at the recent form, you'll get an idea for what I'm talking about. Where last time out, finished 11th at the Barracuda, so nearly a top 10 finish, and then was 13th at the Barbasol. Now, Barracuda was obviously a different type of scoring. They had Stableford there. Barbasol, also a birdie fest. Not really the same type of course we're going to get this week, which will be an easy course, but not nearly as easy as the setups the last 2 weeks. You know, I'd much rather see an 11th and a 13th place finish than him just hardly missing the cut or going out there and finishing 40th or 50th, right? Clearly has shown a little bit of form, but more importantly, you know, the season-long metrics for Taylor Penderth are indicative of him being clearly a top 5 rookie. And obviously, guys like Cameron Young, Davis Riley, Sahith Theegala are deservingly getting a lot of attention. But if Penderth hadn't had that injury, I'm extremely certain that he would be up there with them, if not surpassing at least 1 to 2 of them. I mean, to me, he's probably at least the second highest pedigree rookie this year, behind somebody probably like Cam Young, who's deservingly one of the favorites in this field, and somebody I think that pretty much everyone on tour, every fan of the PGA Tour is extremely bullish on. But let's talk about Taylor Pendrith's game. He is a ball striking phenom, and if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, even over the last 50 measured rounds, so giving him a huge sample size here, you'll get an idea for his game where, you know, obviously there were a few missed cuts there after the Players and before that, but still gaining significantly off the tee, a slight gainer on approach, and over the last 24 measured rounds, you really get an idea for it too, right? From tee to green, he's going to be an absolute maestro. Now, over the last 50 measured rounds, around the green hasn't really been a positive, right? You can see it's a marginal loss, but here at Detroit Golf Club, if there's one stat I'm almost completely just throwing out the window, it's around the green play. So for somebody like Taylor, not something I'm holding against him whatsoever. The real X factor for him is when he gains with the putter. When he goes out there and is even a neutral with the flat stick, he's going to be in the top 25. When he goes out there and he gains with the flat stick is when he goes out there and he breaks slates. And though it's not a massive sample size, in fact, just 8 rounds here for Taylor Pendrith, he gains 0.44 shots per round on this bent POA hybrid surface. And again, a small sample size. So only, you know, take it with a grain of salt, understand that there's a lot of volatility when you have a small sample size. But from what we've seen on similar type of greens, he's had plenty of success. And if that's the one missing piece, and we're really trying to find any reason to hunker down on a player, you know, that's something that I'm willing to go after, because in the past, last year at this same event, I went with that same narrative with Cam Davis, who only had, I believe, 10 rounds to his record on the bent POA mix, but was 0.7 shots better per round than any other surface. Now, those were breadcrumbs, right? You know, when you have a sub 20 round sample size, there is going to be that volatility I'm talking about, but I'm willing to take those chances, particularly on ball strikers, like a Cam Davis last year, who ended up coming through for us, or somebody like a Taylor Pendrith, who has two top 15 finishes in a row, a few other extremely impressive finishes throughout the season this year, and he's not being completely slept on. I'm not the only person who has identified him as somebody who's mispriced Also probably going to be relatively low owned, but I do think he's worth the attention that he's getting, and probably worth even more attention that he's getting at this point. I mean, I have him projected right now for right around like 7% ownership. It's fluctuated quite a bit over the last day or so. We'll see what it comes in tonight, also tomorrow for our Wednesday live chat, where Taylor Penderth is projected, but I'd imagine way lower than it should be. And if that's going to be the case, somebody I'm going to have plenty of leverage on. Taking a look at Chris Goddard now, and last week he was a fade. Somebody I played in 0% of my lineups, and it didn't really matter one way or the other because of how many birdies he made. You know, he didn't hurt you if you had him. He obviously wasn't close to an optimal play either, but because he didn't go out there and finish in the top 5 to top 10, I think he's going to be slept on here. I think he's going to be much lower owned than he should be, because in reality, he showed us exactly what we expected from him last week. And he's really created his identity here on tour, at least for analysts like myself that have been able to dive into the numbers. He's a ball striking phenom. I mean, off the tee, he's one of the best off the tee players on tour immediately. Now that he's on the PGA Tour, when he hits the driver, it looks like a Brooks Koepka's ball flight. I mean, just hits it in an absolute country mile. It doesn't hurt that he also looks like Brooks Koepka. I think that's why it's easy to make those sort of comparisons. But realistically, the ball flight numbers, everything like that, it's effortless power. It doesn't look like he's trying to overpower the golf ball, and he's carrying it 320 yards plus and doing it with accuracy. So clearly he's kind of holding back when it comes to that power. This golf course is meant for players like that, right? He can get a little bit swirly from time to time off the tee. That's why he's not consistently gaining 6 strokes to the field off the tee. But when you have massive landing areas, or at least generous landing areas without much penalties or hazards or trees to worry about here at Detroit Golf Club, that plays directly into his skill set, right? Which is just to bomb it off the tee. And the real X factor for Chris Goddard has not just been the off the tee play, it's also been his approach play, which has arguably been the best part of his game, where he's gaining 1.1 shots per round, right? So off the tee, you can see he's gaining a third of a stroke per round. That's the one thing I really noticed with watching him on Shot Tracker, also from the shots that we were able to see on the telecast. But the approach play has, at least statistically, been the most impressive part of it. And if you look at his Shot Tracker, he's hitting shots to 4 to 5 feet all day. Unfortunately, not cashing in on all his opportunities. You can see there his shots gained putting numbers. He's losing 1.4 shots per round. But again, this is a super small sample size. In fact, just a 4-round sample size. He's gaining 0.75 shots per round on the Bent POA hybrid. So if there's going to be one surface where we'd expect him to go out there and buck that trend, it might be this week, and on these type of greens, and with the ball striking stats that we've seen, I mean, even just a neutral performance from Chris Goddard might be a top 10, top 15 finish. I mean, he looks like one of those type of players from tee to green. I mean, even with his shots gained around the green, he's gaining nearly 2/3 of a stroke per round, which I don't care about this week, right? But that's still impressive. I mean, this kid is a legitimate bona fide stud at this point, and if he can just plug the leak with the putter, which he was able to do on the Bent POA surface in the past, watch out, he could be your winner this week. In fact, somebody I've bet outright. I know a lot of other people out there have done the same thing, and frankly, I see another big community win happening. Last year, it was Cam Davis, who was in the same type of situation. And I don't think in DFS, because, you know, it's most of these DFS hardcore people that are going to be on Chris Goddard. I don't know if he's going to be 20, 25% owned. I think he's probably going to be like 15 to 18% owned come Wednesday. And to me, that's something I'm willing to get over the field on. Like, I'm willing to play him at a third of my lineups this week. Betting him outright, just the price seems more than adequate at $7,400. He's going to be that one piece of quote-unquote chalk in the 7K range that I'm pretty much eating this week no matter what. It's just I'm not going to worry about the ownership unless it's like 25 to 30%, right? Then we might need to revisit that conversation. So I don't want to say, you know, never say never when it comes to fading him this week, but it's going to take a whole lot for me to talk myself off of Chris Goddard. Let's talk about Nick Hardy next, here at $7,300. Another player who really got disappointed last week, where he made the cut at the least, but finished there, I believe it was a tied for 58th, if memory serves me correctly. Let's go ahead and confirm that. Yes, it was a tie for 58th. On top of that, before that, right, 13th at the Barracuda, that's pretty solid. 30th at the John Deere, meh, and then an 8th at the Travelers. It seems like this guy goes impressive performance, kind of middling performance, impressive performance, kind of middling performance, performance. Are we due for the impressive performance here if the trend continues? It certainly looks that type of way, but obviously, jokes aside with that, he's going to be low owned this week, right? Because he went out there, he didn't really do anything for people here in DFS. People are going to get bored of playing Nick Hardy, particularly now that the field is stronger. He's a solid, $700, $800 cheaper this week. I expect him to probably be at least 10%, maybe even 15% lower owned than he was in certain contests. Last week, Nick Hardy was nearly 26, 27% in some of the higher dollar single entry contests. So this week, you might see him at 11, 12% in those contests. So you're getting a salary decrease, also an ownership decrease at a golf course that really fits this same type of game, right? He's a bomber. He's a high birdie percentage player, aggressive, one of these young up-and-coming Korn Ferry Tour stars where, week in and week out, 20, 25 under par is winning in those golf tournaments. They're used to going out there and taking apart a golf course, like what you're going to see here with this week. They're comfortable with going low. So guys like Nick Hardy, Chris Gotterup, fits that same example in college, right? They're taking apart golf courses. Taylor Pendrith was one of the best Korn Ferry Tour players when he was out there. These are the type of high horsepower type of guys that actually have the firepower to go out there and shoot something like 25 under par that I'm trying to get to this week. Next up, we've got Patrick Rodgers here at $7,100. And Patrick Rodgers, you take him at Birdie Fest. He's a great putter. He's not the most consistent player, though. He's certainly going to hit some really, really wacky shots, particularly on approach. He's due to go out there, hit at least a few shanks per round. But when you get him on an easy track where he can make up for it with his, at least I'd say, serviceable around the green play, and obviously that magical putter that he's known for, is when you get absolute fireworks from him. Now, on the Ben Poa surface, it's not a massive sample size, but still gaining close to a quarter of a stroke per round, so you don't hate to see that. He's historically a little bit better than that, though, right? So it's not one of his favorite surfaces, but like I said, a small sample size. So we'll look into it, but we won't overlook into it. But of late, just the putter's been carrying him, right? Gaining 3/4 of a stroke per round. He's gaining both off the tee and on approach, which is what you'd like to see from Patrick Rodgers. Now, we're used to seeing him gain off the tee. He's gaining 1/3 of a stroke per round. Now, with the approach play, that might be a little bit more surprising. Usually when we check up on his stats, if you look at the last 50 measured rounds, I'd imagine you can get an idea for what I'm talking about here. Oh, he's still gaining over that stretch. So, maybe he's plugged that hole, but if you just look a few months before that, you'll see a player who's losing consistently on approach, somebody who's close to half a stroke loss per round with the approach play, just because he's inconsistent. He hits a lot of shanks, right? But when he goes out there and he's dialed in and he can actually hit the shots he's intending to hit from day to day, you'll see him have those spike performances because, like any of these tour players, they are more than capable of going out there and gaining 2 to 3 strokes in a round with the approach play. Just some players are a lot more live to do that than others. And Patrick Rodgers, more towards the inconsistent side of that spectrum. But what we really like here is the putting ability. Of course, my main key stat at this golf course this week is going to be shots gained putting. And on the Ben Poa surface, he's still a gainer for his career, right? So even though it's not his favorite surface, he's better on Poa. I believe he's just better on pure bent grass as well. Still somebody who should gain to the field. And if the recent form metrics hold up whatsoever, he gains close to half a stroke or 3/4 of a stroke per round. I think we'd be pretty satisfied with that result. Next up, moving to our last two values, which we're going to focus on Beau Hosler to begin at $6,800, and another player who's more of a putting specialist who on the Ben Poa surface has actually shined, though. You can see gaining close to 2/3 of a stroke per round. Let's break down the shots gain metrics, which for Beau have not been great. This is, far from a good stretch of golf for good old Beau Hosler. Where's he at here? He's priced at $6,800. That was a little bit too low on the docket here. You can see he's gaining off the tee. He's gaining close to 3/4 of a stroke per round with the putter. And this is kind of what we're used to seeing with a Patrick Rodgers, right? He's going to gain around the green, gain in pretty much every category but approach. Beau Hosler, not the most consistent approach player. Very consistent with what we saw with Pete Rodgers. That's why a lot of people are going to play Rodgers this week. It's also why he's more expensive. Should be somewhere close to like 8 to maybe even 12% ownership on somebody like a Patrick Rodgers. He's certainly not going to be ignored. Whereas Beau Hosler down here at $6,800, you're probably looking at 3 to 5% at the very most this week. So going to be a lot easier to get leverage. And in terms of upside, I'd argue they're pretty much the same player. right? They're relatively long off the tee, putting specialists who from time to time can go out there and spike with the approach play. Now, one guy's coming in with form, one guy's coming in without form, but historically, right, they're pretty much the same guy. And if you're getting somebody at a third of the ownership, also cheaper, right, I'd argue that Beau Hosler might even have higher upside this week, particularly for some of the larger field contests. So I'll be playing both of them, but Beau Hosler, particularly in some of these higher risk situations where you're playing against 20 to 100,000 other entries, makes him even more intriguing in my opinion. Next up, we've got David Lipsky, another player at $6,800, and he'll be the last value that we touch on here. So another player who on the Ben Poa surface is his best self. You can see also gaining close to 0.6 shots per round, and of late has kind of just been going under the radar. So, obviously with Beau Hosler, we'll just go ahead and show you, right? Missed cut, 53rd. A couple made cuts at the Memorial and Charles Schwab, also at the PGA. You like to see that. But, over his last few starts, right? 53rd, missed cut. Not really what you like to see. Same thing with David Lipsky, right? Missed cut, 24th. Okay, that's decent at the John Deere Classic, but missed cut. Just these two players aren't coming in with the best form, so that's why they're going to be relatively overlooked this week. That's also why they're relatively cheap. But when we just zoom out to the last 50 measured rounds, right, you really get a good idea of why Lipsky's popping, why I really want to get to him, because, with the approach play, significant gainer, close to a third of a stroke per round. Off the tee, he's more than accurate to get the job done. He's not the longest player, which would be helpful around the Rocket Mortgage Classic, around Detroit Golf Club, but it's not a necessity. With the putters right around a neutral. But like I mentioned before, when we get him on Ben Poa, and for him it's right around a 10-round sample size, he has gone out there and performed his best. So we're going to see a similar performance this time around. Obviously, I like a lot of the upside there. And the ball striking stats from pretty much the entire year have been more than serviceable, right? He's not the best player off the tee. He's usually just a slight marginal gainer in that category. But on approach, up there close to a third of a stroke per round pretty much the entire year. And the putter has been close to a neutral the whole year, right? So he's not an elite level ball striker like a Chris Gotterup, who I think is just going to be an absolute stud. Somebody like a Taylor Pendrith even, who's maybe a little bit of a better ball striker, but he's also bringing that consistency to the table. So if you're trying to play cash contests, David Lipsky, really I'd be playing in almost every cash lineup this week because I think he's making the cut almost for sure at $6,800. If you're playing in single entries or smaller field contests, I like him even more. But like I said, Beau Hosler, guys like Patrick Rogers, who may be a little bit higher risk this week, are even better in the large field, more risky type of contest. So, as per usual with the value picks, make sure you're catering them towards the contests that you're entering because all of them are perhaps more or less attractive depending on the format that you're in. Alrighty, that's all I've got for this week's values. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and comment down below who your favorite value is. Just make sure they're $7,500 or cheaper. And also make sure you go ahead and smash that like button. We will be having even more content dropping throughout the week. Tomorrow morning, our fades and sleepers. Also, our weekly DFS live stream will be Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can bring in any questions you have. We'll be doing some live Q&A. Also talking about the weather, any stacks I'm going with, my projections. We'll do some strategy talk as well, talk through what the chalky builds will be, the types of builds that I may be considering, the types of roles I'm going with for the optimizer side, just all the stuff you need to know last second, right? Just making sure we have all the P's and Q's taken care of before we get into the slate. But I'm looking forward to it, guys. Hopefully this video gave you an idea of some of the cheaper plays to get to perhaps be a little bit more flexible up top or get some of that ownership leverage we talked about. But I appreciate all the support here, guys. You guys liking the video. Make sure you are subbed to the channel also, so you don't miss any of the content when it drops in the future. Best of luck with all of your lineups this week, any bets that you're going with from an outright perspective, and let's get this cash.